Ever since Colonel Gaddafi was brought out of the diplomatic wilderness, Libya has become an increasingly important partner for Europe. On his first ever visit to Brussels in 2004, he was given the sort of ceremonial welcome which would have been unthinkable a few years before. Many of the European Union's 27 members are now big investors in Libya. You don't have to look far to see why Libya is an important trading partner for the European Union. It provides nearly 10% of its oil. It's now the third largest supplier behind Norway and Russia, and its importance is growing. Only recently it overtook Saudi Arabia for that third spot. It was the decision of the United Nations to lift sanctions against Gaddafi's government that started the European rush. The former colonial power Italy was among the first to normalise relations. Others soon followed, attracted by the prospect of oil from a supplier close to Europe. Libya has the largest reserves of oil in Africa, and its deposits are relatively cheap to exploit. The release by Britain of the Lockerbie bomber was a sign of the UK's willingness to foster good relations with Gaddafi, even though it risked damaging ties with the United States. But even Britain is now condemning Libyan actions.
The Foreign Secretary spoke today and said he was very concerned about the situation in Libya. We condemn the use of heavy weaponry against protesters. We're shocked by the reports of the number of deaths, 35 apparently at one hospital overnight. And we've had to say very clearly, just because the news media doesn't have full access to Libya, the eyes of the world are still upon the Libyan government and how it is responding to protest.
And as the crisis deepens, Europe is coming under increasing pressure to act. Harry Smith, AlJazeera.
Anti-government protests have, according to posts on the internet, taken place in parts of the Iranian capital. According to several opposition websites, police fired tear gas at protesters. Well, there are also messages on Twitter suggesting there have been scattered clashes, with some people being arrested and beaten by security forces and plainclothes thugs. Opposition groups have urged their supporters to return to the streets to mark a week since the deaths of 2 people killed in protests. Well, speaking earlier on Sunday, Iran's parliamentary speaker gave his support to regional protests without mentioning those in his own country.
The Iranian parliament supports the revolution of the oppressed people of the region against exploitation from America and domestic despotism, which is dependent on Western powers. We advise them to keep resisting. We warn the United States that Islamic nations believe the despotic rulers play this criminal game with US operational orders. The United States should pay for this brutal conduct in the future.
Suez Canal officials are denying reports that 2 Iranian naval ships have sailed through the waterway. Well, that's despite claims by Iranian state television that they've already passed through and on their way to Syria. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it's an attempt by Iran to broaden its regional influence.
We can just see how unstable a region we live in, a region where Iran attempts to take advantage of the current situation to advance its influence by passing through the Suez Canal 2 war vessels. Israel sees the Iranian step as dangerous.
Reports in Colombia are casting doubt on the government's claim they rescued former presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt from armed guerrillas. Colombian radio says it has seen a US diplomatic cable from WikiLeaks. Apparently, it indicates a leader of FARC armed group discussed releasing Betancourt if he was allowed to go to France. Well, this was the scene in July 2008 when she returned to Paris after her release. Venezuela's foreign minister is hitting out at the US after it called for an investigation into alleged rights abuses by Hugo Chávez's government. Nicolas Maduro said the US should not meddle in Venezuela's affairs. A group of Venezuelan students who've been on hunger strike for more than 2 weeks are demanding the inquiry. Well, they say the government uses judges and prosecutors against Chávez's political rivals. Well, Mexico's President Felipe Calderón says he's sending more troops to fight drug cartels in the country's north. 4 new battalions will go to the border region. The north's key drug smuggling routes into the US have suffered significant violence between security forces and criminal groups. More than 34,000 people have died in drug-related violence since 2006.
We know the difficult circumstances facing the people of the northeast border and this entire region devastated by criminals without remorse. And due to the irresponsible actions of criminals from several groups, I announced that I have ordered 4 additional army battalions to this region with the aim of backing up the work of the armed forces.
Male hairdressers in Gaza are appealing to human rights groups, claiming Hamas has banned them from working. Well, they say they were raided by plainclothes policemen and ordered to stop cutting women's hair. They also claim to have been banned from re-entering their premises. They say they face jail and a $5,000 fine if they go back to work. Hamas has not responded. Afghan medical officials say at least 40 people are now known to have been killed in Saturday's suicide attack. The Taliban says one of its fighters blew himself up at Kabul Bank in Jalalabad. 73 more people have been injured. The bomber targeted intelligence and security workers collecting their salaries. Meanwhile, a governor in eastern Kunar province says recent attacks by US-led NATO forces have killed 64 people, including 20 women and 29 children. Dozens more wounded are being treated in hospitals in Asadabad. NATO says it's investigating reports that 7 civilians were injured in those military operations. Well, Sue Turton has more from southern Afghanistan.
A joint 4-day operation had been launched by ISAF forces and the Afghan National Army on the Razi-Arbat district of Kunar province, which is to the east on the Pakistan border. It's a valley area where reports of Taliban activity had come through. The local governor says that he believes 64 people were killed in the attack. Now, ISAF put out a report saying they believe they'd killed 30 Taliban fighters, which could mean that many civilians were also caught up in this attack. And an investigation has been launched into how many of those dead were indeed civilians. The governor's also told us that many of those who were injured in the operation and taken to the capital hospital were women and children. Now, the attack comes just a day after the Taliban launched a separate attack in the neighbouring province of Nangarhar in Jalalabad. The attack was on the Kabul Bank by 7 suicide bombers. 2 who managed to detonate their vests, 5 were killed before they could do so. The bank at the time was full of government employees, local police collecting their wages. So far, we're told that 40 were killed and another 70 people were injured.
At least 17 people have been injured in southern Thailand in 2 separate attacks. Both took place on Saturday night in Narathiwat province. 2 people were injured after they were caught in a shootout at a restaurant. Others were wounded when a car bomb went off. Police in Vietnam say a tour boat that sank, killing 12 tourists, is owned by a company linked to another deadly accident 2 years ago. Relatives of those killed have been identifying and collecting bodies of their loved ones. They drowned before dawn on Thursday when their boat sank. 15 people have been killed in fighting in the Somali capital between African Union and the Shabab forces. Clashes in Mogadishu broke out during the weekend, centering on the southern districts of Hodan and Halobdag. At least 21 other civilians were injured in the attacks. The Somali government has confirmed 4 Americans who went missing on Friday have been kidnapped by Somali pirates. They were sailing on a private yacht off the coast of Oman when the ship was hijacked.
As a government, we confirm that 4 Americans were kidnapped by Somali pirates.